Okay, so today we're going to talk a little bit about Module 1, Lesson 3 for College Prep Math 2, and this lesson's all about an introduction to these things called integers. And so before we get any further, we kind of need to talk about what an integer is. Integer is a set of numbers that we're going to use very, very often in this class, and basically what it is it's the counting numbers, which, everyone knows those. It's what you first learn when you're a kid, learning your numbers. So like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then it continues on, right? Plus the number 0, we're going to need to add that in there, and then these things called the opposite of all of those positive counting numbers. So the opposite of 1 is -1. Opposite of 2 is -2. And then so on. And then this set is going to go to the left. And the reason why we need these numbers that, are both positive over here and negative over here is because things go in different directions in the real world, right? If you're talking about the stock market, it goes up and it goes down. So we need numbers to represent those differently. We use positive and negative numbers for that. We have elevations above sea level and below sea level. So we use positive and negative numbers to represent that. There's just very, very many situations in the real world where things go in two different directions, and we use positive and negative numbers to represent that. Okay, so what are we going to do with that? Well, we're going to do a few different things. Now, one thing that you'll notice whenever you start to use these integers in the real world is nobody ever says, oh, my stock value decreased by -$500, right? That doesn't happen. What we do instead is we use words like decrease or reduced by or increased or went up to represent the positive and negative nature of our number instead. So if you see a sentence like this, the temperature decreased by 30 degrees, okay, and you're asked to change this sentence into an integer value, we would use -30, right? And even though I didn't put a negative sign here in my sentence, I know that it's negative because this key word right here, decreased, tells me that my value is going to be negative. So we want to watch out for that. We're almost never in an English sentence going to use a positive or negative sign for our number. What we're going to do instead is we're going to look for these keywords like decreased or increased or reduced, or to tell us whether our value is positive or negative. Okay. Now we are going to use number lines to start. We're going to do some graphing in this class, and then you'll do even more graphing in your next class, kind of whatever your next class is beyond this. And so it's important that we start to get comfortable with that. We're going to use number lines for some very simple graphing to get started. It's just a nice, easy way to represent the integers visually, right? And I think that this is one thing, a lot of people that struggle with math start to do a little better when they start to think about math visually. If we can use tools like this to make it something that we can see, it makes it a little easier to understand what's going on. And you'll notice the numbers here, the negative numbers are over here on the left side of my number line. The positive numbers are over here on the right side. Okay, and one thing to note about this number line is these arrows on the end. Those tell me that this is not the end of the number line. It does continue on, and in fact, the number lines continue forever, right? Just like the set of integers continues forever, and it does that in both directions. You'll notice we've got an arrow over here as well. Our numbers are getting more and more positive as we go to the right. Our numbers are getting more and more negative as we go to the left. Now, this is a valuable tool. What we're going to do with it is we're going to graph some points. Like if I was to ask you to graph the value 3, then all we would do is we would take that 3, we would come over here to the 3 on our number line, and we would just kind of mark it. Okay, and you'll notice that is to the right of 0. All of our positive numbers are going to be to the right of 0 every single time. Similarly, if I was to ask you to graph the value -4, I'm just going to find that -4 on my number line. I'm going to mark that. And again, because it's a negative value, you'll notice it's to the left of 0. All of our negative numbers are going to be to the left of 0 on our number line. Okay. Now, one important relationship about all of the points on this number line is our small values are going to be to the left and our big values are going to be to the right. It makes sense over here. We all know that 1 is less than 5, right? And 1 is further to the left on the number line than 5 is. So we could say, we're going to use these things called inequalities. We could say 1 is less than 5. That one's pretty natural for us when we're comparing a couple of positive numbers. It's usually pretty it's something that we can kind of figure out, right? But when we start to throw these integer values that are positive and negative in there, it can get a little trickier. Like if we're going to try to make a comparison between 3 and -4, and we're going to try to decide which one's smaller and which one's bigger, well, this is where the number line can really help us out, because like I mentioned earlier, the small stuff is always on the left on these number lines, and then the values get bigger as we go to the right. So if we just look at these two numbers, the -4 and the 3, well, -4 is much further to the left on our number line. Okay, anytime we have a value that's further to the left on our number line, we're looking at a smaller value. Okay, now a lot of people also have trouble with the less than symbol, which looks like this, versus the greater than symbol, which looks like this, right? Which one do we do? And you know, the words are, you want to learn them eventually, right? But when you're first learning, the important thing is getting the symbol pointing in the right direction. What you can do as kind of a shortcut to make sure you get your symbol pointing in the right direction, if you're looking at 3 and -4, figure out which one's further to the left on your number line. That's going to be the smaller value. And then just put a dot by that small one, and then the symbol is just always going to open up the other direction. Okay, so if we were doing something like 5 and -2, and we wanted to compare those, 5 is over here, -2 is over here, -2 is further to the left, right? And remember, things that are further to the left on our number line are smaller values. I'm just going to put a dot by my smaller one and then open up my symbol the other direction. We would read this, 5 is greater than -2. Okay, so inequalities are going to take a little bit of practice, but hopefully that's enough to get you off to a good start with these. Okay, now you'll notice that 3 and -3 are, like if I'm looking at the value 3 here, I am 1, 2, 3 units to the right of 0. Okay, similarly, if I look at the value -3, I am 1, 2, 3 units to the left of 0. Okay, those two values are the same distance from 0. Okay, we call those numbers opposite numbers, and they're very easy to recognize. They're just going to have the same value, but with opposite signs. So 3 and -3 are opposites because they're the same values, just with opposite signs. If we have something like -7 and we want to find the opposite of -7, well, we're just going to take that, we're going to change its sign. There's one kind of tricky one, right? And that's the number 0. If you're looking for the opposite of 0, well, 0 is 0 units away, right? We haven't moved at all. So the only number that's going to be that same distance away is 0. And so 0 is its own opposite. So that's kind of a tricky thing that we'll see a little later, and it's one that you want to remember. Okay. So that brings us to kind of our next operation that we're going to talk about a little bit in this lesson. Okay, that's this thing called the absolute value. Okay, so the absolute value what that is, it's the distance of a number from 0. Okay, so if we look back at our number line here, if we want to find the absolute value, and the way that we notate the absolute value here is we use these little vertical bars. So if I want to write something like the absolute value of -4, we would just write it like this, or the absolute value of 3 would look something like this. Okay, so if I want to, let's start with this one. Let's say we want to find the absolute value of 3. Well, 3 is over here, and to get the answer to this, we just want to figure out the distance of that number from 0. So how far away from 0 is 3? Well, it's 1, 2, 3 units over here, right? And so the absolute value of 3 is 3. Okay. Now let's do this same thing for this -4. If you want to find the absolute value of -4, well, -4 is over here. How many units away from 0 is that? Well, it is 1, 2, 3, 4 units away. And absolute value is a distance. It's a number of units, right? There's no such thing as a negative distance. So when we take an absolute value, the result that we get will always be 0 or positive. It just can't be negative. There's no way for that to happen. So it's actually pretty simple. If you've got the absolute value of a positive number, you're just going to kind of drop the absolute value symbol off, and it's just going to stay the same. But if you have the absolute value of a negative, then you're going to replace that value with its opposite. Since again, we're trying to find the distances here, distances will always be positive. Okay. All right. So we could actually ask you some more complicated type of questions. So let's look at a couple more of these absolute value problems. We might ask you to evaluate minus the absolute value of -8. And to me, this problem has a couple of little pieces to it. I'm going to start by looking at this absolute value piece here. Okay, and so the absolute value of -8, well, we know it's going to be positive. Just for this piece, all of our absolute values are going to be positive, right? And if we have a negative inside there, we're just going to replace it with its opposite. So the absolute value of -8 is 8, right? But this negative that was hanging out in the front, I haven't done anything with it yet. So I've got to bring that on down. And so this is going to be my final answer here. So the absolute value piece has to be negative, or I'm sorry, has to be positive. It can't be negative, right? And so because of this negative out front that's going to come on down, this answer has to be negative. So we're going to wind up with a -8 there. Okay. Let's kind of combine these two ideas together. Let's do one more kind of tricky problem. If we're trying to compare, let's answer less than or greater than for this. So let's compare the absolute value of -50 to the opposite of -50. Okay. And really, for these, you can have 3 different potential answers. You can have a less than, you can have a greater than, you can also have an equal to here for these. So if we're working this out, we want to kind of do these one at a time, and we want to simplify them first because it's messy, kind of complicated, a lot going on with these things right off the bat. So if I'm just looking at this first piece over here, we want the absolute value of -50. Well, our rule says if you got a negative inside there, we're just going to take it, we're going to make it positive. So this is just going to be equal to positive 50. Over here on the other side, I want the opposite of -50. Well, when we find the opposite of a number, what that means is we just take it, we change its sign. So the opposite of -50 is going to be 50 as well. So now that we've got these things simplified, we can see that the value on these two sides is exactly the same, and so these have to be equal. So equal is the symbol that we want to use to fill in that blank there. Okay. All right, so hopefully that's enough to get you off to a good start in this. There's a lot of vocabulary and a lot of terms you want to get comfortable with because we'll see them again later in the course. But please let me know if you have any questions as you're going through it, and you have a nice day.